Hey guys! This part 5 of What If Naruto became a samurai. Hit like and subscribe if you like this one, and also please check the author in the description. Let's start.
We are pain, that's all. We are God.
Chapter 10 Convergence. Danzo Shimura. Almost 3 weeks of hard and cautious traveling had brought him and 24 of his remaining operatives to the eastern edge of the known world. It was almost beautiful, with a clear sky, the strong and clean scent of the salt ocean, the cry of gulls overhead as the bright grass at his feet swayed in the gentlest of breezes. Almost beautiful. Danzo hated it. The bandaged leader of Root, though Root in nothing but name now, watched the ships docking in the many-fingered Jedis of the city of Ikemen. Like toy boats bobbing in bathwater, Danzo watched them sway from his position high up on the edge of the somewhat famous Azurite cliffs. The blue rock could be seen from miles away, a symbol of safety in the treacherous depths of the Nanzen Ocean. Danzo struggled to articulate, before suppressing, of course, what his bundle of emotions was telling him. Failure. Failure, yes, that's what it felt like to be here instead of what it really was. 1,000 times he told himself this was just one more in a series of contingency plans he never thought he'd need. Very few times in his life had he ever cursed vulgarity was for the mentally deficient. But fuck Sarutobi and fuck Mikoto. Theirs had been a complicated relationship full of ups and downs. But mutual respect, skill, and sometimes opposite views had sharpened them both on each other like whetstones. Konoha had benefited from such a competition. Until now. Hiruzen had won, hadn't he? Danzo's aged, yet still strong fist clenched, nails digging in and drawing blood in crescent shapes. He wanted to scream till his vocal cords strained and broke from the sheer animal fury, screaming until the sheer power of the sound waves toppled Ikemen's thick walls and scrubbed its black nickname till it was known only as a wasteland. The world would be far better with black Ikemen's corrupt and deviant black markets and flesh circuses. Breathe. Breathe. Danzo calmed. No matter how many artists would give their left ear to paint this very vista he stared at, Danzo would never be able to appreciate this the way it deserved. He longed for home. He longed for the dappled shadows of the forested woods of his true home. Under the canopy of Konohagakure. But Danzo knew, without a shadow of a doubt, that he wouldn't be seeing his home after he stepped foot on the ship he'd booked 3 months ago, bound for the unknown places out beyond the island country of Pear. Grass crunched under the sandaled feet of a person he both expected, dreaded, and envied. Today was a day for nuance and complicated things, plans and emotions both. Lord Danzo. I stand ready. The once Hokage of Konoha turned and pinned the heavily clothed operative, face covered with a black mask that left just his mouth open to the world, with a stare that made lesser men sweat. Torian Aburame, however, was no lesser man. In a world that rewarded expert killers, Torian was an artist and would have been handsomely compensated anywhere he so chose. Torian was a patriot, however, and loved his country more than he loved his own life. Why else would he volunteer for a mission that would most likely see him isolated, living off the land, and inevitably dying to his own former comrades? He had the will of fire. Torian would burn out the rot, so the roots of the great tree could be rejuvenated and continue on. The roots of the great tree would return, stronger than ever. At least, that was Danzo's great hope. But he envied the mission Torian was about to embark on insofar that he got to stay in his home while Danzo ran away. His only consolation in this entire fiasco was that the grand plan was still in motion and Danzo got to rewatch, in his Sharingan-aided mind's eye, the moment of surprise and horror as he skewered his former best friend, former rival, former royal pain in the ass Hiruzen Sarutobi, over and over again. Dead. 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 Blessedly dead. Incompetence at an end, despite Konoha being in the clutches of that cursed Uchiha, Sarutobi's ruinous foreign policy stance could no longer bring Konoha to its veritable knees. Indeed, when Danzo secured Western alliances and returned, he would be lauded as the kind of leader Konoha on a war footing required. Danzo knew war was inevitable. Anoki was fence-sitting no longer. Pain of Amigakure would wait patiently in wings, played as he was being by the Seifuku-sha and Danzo himself. Then there was Orochimaru, an eye of Kumobikure. That man alone was an ironmonger of grand ambition, and with recent intelligence that I was building untold amounts of chakra-based weapons, Konohagakure needed allies and an edge against the tide of blood that was coming. What he did today and in the coming months would be that edge. But for it to be the true surprise it needed to be, Torian would be instrumental. So Danzo gave his instructions and Torian Aburame, loyal soldier of former root, listened. Orochimaru had reneged on their agreement. Betrayed the trust Danzo had bestowed on him. That would require addressing, among other items of importance. Torian would see to it. Denial of desire was a fascinatingly effective form of revenge. When Danzo was finished speaking his need, Torian bowed at the waist, high-collared coat crinkled from salt exposure, and left without another word back the way they'd all come. That done, Fu, his right-hand man, stepped up from where he'd been quietly watching the exchange between his leader and the operative and glanced to where Danzo was looking. Back down the cliff, towards the path they take down, a messenger was hurrying towards them. That courier is an agent of the Seifuku-sha. His name is Ehrlich. A curious name. Indeed. I suspect it is a parish name. I overheard some chatter that our patron for this endeavor cares about much more than the emancipation of Konohagakure from the yoke of the elemental nations. Danzo turned fully and, with Fu his auburn ponytail swaying, both observed Ehrlich huffing and puffing his way to them. What are your conclusions, Fu? The Seifuku-sha is searching for something on the western continent. I believe he spoke briefly of a key or the key. I can't be certain either way. Those are two wholly different interpretations and meanings. We must have clarity. Yes, Lord Danzo. I don't know who the Seifuku-sha is and I don't care. Konoha is all. We have concurrent paths for now, but whosoever walks the path of daggers must know the players. We walk a sharp path indeed to not know everything about him as soon as possible. I hear and obey, Lord Danzo. Ehrlich, a freckle-faced boy of 16 summers, lanky in the way of a boy stuck in the transition to manhood, stopped an appropriate distance away in order to catch his breath. Odd. The boy had no real chakra system to speak of. When the boy straightened, Danzo pinned him with a stare. Well? Ehrlich gulped. Danzo frowned. This was the messenger of a man like the Seifuku-sha. Preparations to get underway are ready. Captain Ashita is waiting on your lordship's leisure. What a curious accent the boy had, like a clipped staccato trill on the ends of his consonants. Curious. Danzo gestured and Fu and Ehrlich both started away. The last Shimura turned one last time towards where he knew Konoha lay, 1,000 miles away, and smiled sadly. What I do for you. Unbidden, the real image of Hiruzen's face, stuck as it was falling, shone out warm and comforted, like he was witness to some truth of peace beyond the grave, a happiness he'd been denied and life granted at that moment. The whole thing swam into view with the Sharingan's perfect recall. And Danzo really did scream. /unknown? 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 Naruto. The fog was gone. Naruto knew this place of broken blades and skeletons, and that was why he also knew he was asleep, or dreaming, or well, somewhere else. Maybe it was the eerie silence which boomed in his ears, a quiet desolation, or perhaps it was the way the sky boiled and lightning struck upwards, unnaturally silver. This was Naruto's soul. Or something suitably profound, that's how Yojimbo would have put it. That was why it was hard not to freak out when he saw what lay here now, an endlessness uncovered by the disappearance of that soup-like fog. The first time he'd been here, thrown himself really, this shithole had been where a manifestation of the nine-tailed demon fox had been chained. Trapped, like a gigantic malcontent battery in utterly opaque mist. That horrible, mind-destroying form that Naruto had trouble reimagining without a blankness in his head that scared him. Savior. Destroyer. That dual voice of Kurama's had shaken him with those words escaping from that armored shape-shifting nightmare's face. His face. Singing to him. Singing to him of his own death and the deaths of everything he loved. very prescient as it happened. Kurama had turned out to be less of a nightmare and more of, well, the only hope he'd ever had of living. He was his death and his saving grace. Now that he was gone, though, this place looked different. No 7-story demonic fox, no torii gates pinning it to the rocky red earth, no blackened chains straining to contain his impossibly strong self. Mountains like small hills in the distance stuck up like massive swords. Naruto thought for a second and realized they were flat on the sides, sticking up like rectangles. Zanbatos, tens of thousands of feet of what was probably rock in the very shape of the largest zanbatos, a curious flatness and edging that strained the eye. The broken pitted red clay earth was flat as far as the eye could see. Impaled in the ground in strangely symmetrical distances were swords of all shapes and sizes, clustered together all broken one way or another, hilts bent and blackened on some, the edges of the blades gouged in others. Unnaturally long weapons stood out, every 5 blades in every direction, making the height of the whole thing variable, like one of those games where you press your hand onto a bed of dull needles and an imprint of your hand stood out. Every so often there would be a mound of bone, femurs, arms, legs, broken skulls. Judging by how many, there had to be easily hundreds of thousands of dead. And what the hell did that even mean? Naruto had originally thought that was representative of how many people in history the nine-tailed fox had killed. But the bijou didn't reside here anymore. Naruto found himself in a clear path that led straight to a distant structure. While he walked, he racked his brain and couldn't remember the last time whether there had been any kind of structure. No, just that gargantuan spiraling fuinjutsu built onto the ground. Almost like a sacrificial altar that Kurama had lain, pinned like some millennia-old demonic lamb. If he was remembering correctly, this building was atop that same place. Naruto was there, quicker than it was possible to be, and his first impression was overwhelmingly of the color white. The white of bone. The white of a skeleton laying in the sun. The white of sunshine when you'd been inside a dark room for far too long. White columns equidistant surrounded an open-air amphitheater, each level dropping one closer to what looked like a circular stage, slightly raised again one level. A woman stood next to a black orb and in front of yet another white stone something. A throne, perhaps? The air felt heavy, the scent of ozone strong, like being in the center of a lightning bolt as the plasma channels opened, 1/1000th of a second from the million-degree heat that would sear the very molecules in the air. He found himself moving down the steps. "Hello, my little seedling. I'm glad to see you. Come say hello to your mother. It's been a very long time." Naruto stopped and stared. A woman now sat, if you could call a person seemingly carved from some supernaturally beautiful bone something as ordinary as a woman, in an ornately carved throne of some unidentifiable stone. Veins of silver accented the etchings of screaming people clawing upwards, sculpted to look as if drowning and grasping for a savior. Despite the fact there was no blood, no plastered organs, no real violence to be had here, it was easily the most disturbing sight he'd seen since that day. Naruto shivered. This place is dangerous. She is dangerous. But as soon as he had the thought, it drifted away. Goose flesh stood out on his skin as he found himself, dressed as he had when he blew himself up in the valet outfit, standing before her. He couldn't remember stepping down the stairs to stand in front of what she was working on. Naruto stood mesmerized, gazing down into an infinite oblivion in the form of a black sphere that drew his eyes like metal to a lodestone. 2 large men with arms outstretched to touch fingers in a bizarre hug wouldn't have completely covered the circumference. This woman stood now, missing the intervening space between the seat and the orb as she teleported, touching the tops of it, manipulating the images that Naruto saw inside it. Something about what she was doing resonated with him, and he could really see it. Chakra swirled, the feeling of it running through him like a river, and a tiny part of him paid very close attention to what she was doing. Like a bizarre fish tank with only the top open to see what was inside, it was a window into somewhere other, a realm of molten lava, flows stretching as far as his downward watching angle allowed him to see. Another window flashed with icy winds, a temple with a statue outside it that looked suspiciously like the woman herself. A place of nothingness and a place with all white cubed shapes floating, hanging still. Another. Naruto felt his eyes drawn up, the lodestone moving the needle, and his violet eyes latched onto the milky white orbs of this stunning bone woman. But no, his mind wouldn't let him think that anymore. This close to such perfection made it impossible to believe her anything other than an impossibly immaculate alien. Delicate cheekbones rose and swept her face back in a graceful heart-shaped curve that the greatest stonemasons in the world would have murdered their families for the chance to craft in a pale imitation. Then there was the horns and ears. Sweeping, furred ears stuck out like a rabbit, but the horns turned her from prey to predator in an instant. Aggressive, graceful, they suited perfectly. No, she was no bone woman. She was a goddess. His whole being was screaming at him. But Naruto wasn't listening. No, she's no threat, right? She's a prisoner, alright? Voices warred in his head. From her white robe, to her white hair that glimmered like a silver vein, to the pale skin that put the greatest geisha to shame, this creature spoke to him in a way that Naruto didn't understand. He felt compelled. Complete. No! This wasn't right, was it? There was a connection now between them, one that he was only starting to comprehend. But when he heard her voice, everything clicked, and he suddenly did understand. He understood too well. No! This isn't right. It isn't. Orochimaru's face flashed in his head, the orb too, darkening. That jolt. That voice. The prison. It had gone dark, it had been holding her. Do you like what I'm rebuilding, my sweet? I once owned countless worlds beyond this one. This is but a pale imitation, but once you've helped me regain my place, I can do something much superior. Her face twisted in what could only be rage, but it made her more human, not less, and no less exceptional for its ugliness on and in her. Naruto felt the same rage, and that made a bridge across the vast differences. A long time ago, we used to call your world garden. Simple, but perfect, no? When she said garden, powerful words that his mind shook to even attempt to grasp came out. Naruto settled on interpreting it as garden. She smiled at him, a simple curve of arterial blood-red lips. We? 100 thoughts were running through his head at the moment, but overwhelmingly he was starting to realize he was in a huge amount of trouble. Whatever artifact he'd struggled to get away from Orochimaru all that time ago had invited trouble with a capital T into the same space that Kurama had occupied. There was a pull to her that Kurama hadn't had. His hands clenched, and the woman/goddess seemed to notice, frowning and cocking her head. Problems didn't begin to encompass how absolutely fucked Naruto had been from the moment this woman's orb came into his life. That rage, the same rage that got him through everything in his life up to this point, welled up inside him, and it was hard not to start laying about with his fists. This was his fucking soul, so that had to be something, right? Naruto felt himself breathing hard. So Naruto embraced how absolutely furious he was. First the Seifuku-sha, then Orochimaru, his chakra gone, that fucking orb, getting blown up by his own explosive tag, waking up here of all places. When would it end? Who and what are you? Naruto thrust a finger at her and almost spat. Start talking, lady, or I'm grabbing one of those swords and kicking out the squatter. Her laugh almost snuffed the anger out wholesale. TCH. What's so goddamn funny? She hid her laugh behind a hand. Why, it's you, my little rabbit. I always did love watching how spirited you humans are when given an obstacle. Her body, he couldn't describe it as anything other than phased through the huge black sphere, and was chest to chest with him. She radiated heat like a furnace, but her hands were cold when she laid a soft, so incredibly soft, palm on his face. He could feel his whiskers acutely. She put her lips next to his ears and he froze like a rabbit spotting a hawk listening for death. It doesn't pay to be rude, rabbit. Does it? Especially not to your mother. She paused. Let me explain why I brought you here, shall I? She stepped past him, robes and hair swishing faintly. Everything was still. It was impossible, but the ozone feeling intensified. My seeds must be strong, and I'm tired of watching you fail. Fail? Yes. Fail. You perceive your recent losses against those base animals I might add, who cannot even hear its voice, a success? Naruto was reeling. This was so far beyond him that he was struggling to keep up. She must have taken his silence for agreement because she continued, slowly circling him. A predator hunting. I must have a seed strong enough to gather the others. You've already lost one of them, and I mean to have them all, in time. The gate awaits us, after all. I will grant you a boon, a small boon, yes, but it will be the start of more, that is if you but ask. I have so had enough of this. Naruto smacked her hand away from his neck and ignored the powerful static shock when his hand made contact with hers. Listen, lady, you're locked up in my soul and that's where you're going to stay. I don't trust you. I don't like how creepy you are. All I care about is getting Kez to safety, then, well, it's none of your goddamn business. Naruto started walking away. I can't even use my chakra. So if you can help with that, we can talk, we'll call it rent. But I ain't making a bargain with someone stuck away in a sack for a century without some serious convincing. Naruto whirled around, trying to find the way out. What the hell is that big-ass orb too? How did he wake up from this place again? Humph, impudent yet not without merit. Trust is, as they say, a two-way street. Mother is here to help her children. I accept. Naruto spun. She had a sly smile on her face as she held up a hand. On one condition, of course. Scowling, Naruto sat and sprawled on a plinth. Like what? Because frankly, I don't even know what you are, let alone your name. So why would I make a deal with some potentially psychotic asshole granny? Her laugh tinkled like wind through bells. It cut off, and suddenly, as Naruto watched, her eyes spun into black and red whirls, mutating, shifting into purple concentric rings, and then back into milky white. Her face slackened like she'd been wearing a mask of congeniality, of humanity. Black ink, fuinjutsu like none he'd ever seen, spiraled up the bare parts of her arm, snaking up her neck, crossing her chin and cheeks like a helmet. Naruto only caught parts of what it said, but it was so advanced it hurt to look at them. They burned a path through his mind and burrowed in, a worm tunneling to its home. You dare ask my name? The name of your goddess? Naruto was screaming all of a sudden. His body was on fire. No, his body was fire. His mind crunched, and underneath it all a single though stubbornly clung to life, like a giant holding the world above him. If he didn't push back, a feeling told him she'd squash everything he was like a bug under a swatter. Naruto flexed a muscle he didn't know he had. The pain snapped like a rubber band. The pain was gone. This is my soul. His mind was clear. The pressure left. She hadn't even noticed, turning her back to him. Symbologies spiraled and swirled along her spinal column, the bit Naruto could see above her robe collar. Enhancement. I am Kagaya Otsutsuki. Silence stretched. Naruto yawned. He was master and commander here, and she'd learned to respect that, just like that overgrown fur ball Kurama would have. Naruto amended that mentally. Eventually. Yeah, I don't know who hell that is, though. It's nice to meet you, I guess. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. So about this bargain. Kagaya totally ignored the very conceptual idea of the intervening space between them, and one moment was 5 feet away. The next he was choking as she hauled him with main strength up in the air, squeezing his neck. Naruto felt like a kitten held by his mother. Naruto tried to squeeze a grin through his rapidly draining face. He failed. You are an ant. Ants don't quite understand the boot, but I digress. I very much doubt you understand the cosmic scale involved, so let me be quite clear, my child. I was born millions of years ago and came to this flyspeck universe only 10,000 of your years ago, a blip to me, only to watch with rapidly diminishing hope as your uncivilized animal ancestors threw wood and stone spears at each other for the right to rut in a different place and with different people. Her grip tightened and he saw stars. I watched and watched another 10,000 years before your civilization became advanced enough to be properly contacted. White became purple, which became rapidly bluing skin. She seemed to drift. The unmitigated gall to not recognize the dominion of the Otsutsuki extended to all of existence? Including garden? That word again, power incarnate, that burned. Naruto scrabbled desperately at her steel-clamped grip, windows to the outside world darkening. Interminable time later, I met someone worthy and I whelped the very first seed, that precious monkey you call the Sage of Six Paths and his useless, feckless, twin. She brought him close and all he could see now was those horrifying ringed eyes, like staring into the eyes of death itself. She was hissing her words, spittle flying. I am the mother of all. I am the goddess that brought chakra to this world and I will not be disrespected even if my true radiance is shuddered into the cramped menial soul of a stupid child. 1 minute he was choking, close to blacking out, and the next he was at terminal velocity, blasting through the white columns, splitting the earth, as he carved a furrow a mile long with his body. His world was agony. Swords were falling, piled on top of him from where they'd exploded against his skin as he descended like a comet, skipping like a stone. When he came to rest, he had no time to even gasp for the air that was life. Kaguya was there, leaning over him, smiling like a shark, in an instant. Don't fret. Mothers sometimes have to discipline unruly children. Naruto gasped long and hard, trying not to die. She tapped a long, perfect nail against her full lips. But as much as it pains me now, I cannot thus reward you for your spiritedness. Amusing as it is, you will have to find your own way forward. Her robes bunched as she crouched down in one fluid motion. All of a sudden her demeanor changed. The eyes of an Oni from Yomi looked down at him, like a shark, all razor teeth and deadly grace. You want to get back in my good graces, my deviant seed? Find my black will. Perhaps we will speak again later if you've sufficiently pleased me or grovel properly. Naruto watched, not able to take in air, feeling his organs shutting down, as she raised one of those delicate hands which became claws right in front of his eyes. They plunged down, ripping him in half, cratering the ground underneath him. Goodbye, little rabbit. Naruto felt the shockwave as he died. Heaving for breath, Naruto rocketed upwards, smacking his head on a painfully hard object above him. Scrambling, flailing, he tangled his legs and arms in something constricting him and fell, impacting his face on something cold and unyielding. Get away from her! Away! Startled cursing sounded off somewhere above him. Gradually, he lay there breathing and realized he was alive. No Kaguya. No all-power goddess that wanted, no, did rip him apart like tissue paper. He was blessedly alive. Babbling. Naruto knew he was babbling, but he couldn't help it. Words tumbled, tripping, end over end out of his mouth, trying to express the absolute horror that was Kaguya Otsutsuki. Naruto. Lines of imaginary fire outlined the scene where she had sundered him, split him like the cords of wood Naruto had so enjoyed cutting. His hands cramped on those locations, some still covered with the blanket he tripped on, and found himself close to tears. That made him stop and clamp his lips. He'd promised himself no more tears. Anger rose, a shield and sword both. Naruto, stop! Shuddering, he breathed in deeply and let it out. 1, 2, 3, 4, in and then out. Into his vision swam both Kazan and Chio, looking at him from their respective places, one slumped against a wall, the other crouched over him, one hand aglow with healing jutsu. Naruto latched onto her arm and felt the strong muscles, solid, real through her rough-woven shirt, and held it like it was the only thing keeping him alive. She put a hand on his, the other hand tilted his head up, and she looked him in the eyes. Dark met light. Chio shook her head and sighed. I'd love to speak about what just happened, but we have a bigger issue to confront. Thoughts scrambled. He was still stuck on the goddess in his stomach and desperately wished Mifune was here, or Yajimbra, or Taza. Then he was hating himself for the weakness. Naruto still continued to suck in deep breaths until he was as settled as he could be. Kaz's green eyes glittered like emeralds in the faint light through the slats of the poorly fitted wooden walls of the. Now that Naruto noticed, they were in some dilapidated shithole that passed for a one-room home. This most definitely was not part of the plan. They'd said they would hole up in an inn. Either this was the fucking worst inn he'd ever experienced, which was admittedly a limited amount of times, or they were in some kind of on-the-run trouble they hadn't wanted to admit was a possibility when planning their grand escape. What the actual fuck is it now? Language. A little thanks for pulling you out of a ditch swarming with Shin-Torika's men wouldn't be amiss, little shit. Levering himself against the cold stone hearth he'd fallen on, Naruto pushed himself up and took stock. Chio, though he vainly hoped it had been Kaz, had dressed him, not in those valet clothes, but a common laborer's outfit, a sleeveless drab vest with no shirt and loose brown trousers. Naruto pulled the drawstring a little tighter. Perverted old granny better not be taking a look at my goods. Thanks for getting Kaz out. But fuck you for the other shit. Naruto scowled at Chio. Chio just looked at him. You left me alone to get shanked by Tanaka's weird fan club. Thanks for that. Took blowing myself up to get out of that. I did jack all to anyone else. Chio cocked a gray eyebrow. You seem fine. Stop whining. Naruto laughed. It might have had a bitter edge to it. Besides, we have bigger problems. Like I've already said? Like what? Take a look outside, your chakra is crippled, not your legs. Ignoring her rude mutterings, he made his way to the window. Shutters squeaked on rusty hinges as Naruto pushed them ever so slightly open to peer out at the dark city around them. With dusk falling, it was getting harder to see, but not hard enough to miss where they were. From what Naruto remembered of his initial trip into the city as a trust pig for an Asashiro, which admittedly wasn't much given the trust part, was that Hoziki City was divided into quarters. The Perfume Quarter was where Shizumi Mansion and most of the upper-class residents of Hoziki City made their homes. Crisscrossed by canals, as was most of the city, they were correspondingly more well-kept. Judging by the far less picturesque scene outside their humble shack, slanted walls with no railings led down into water you definitely didn't want to drink, a conspicuous lack of maintained gardens, and clustered and stacked terraced housing units that fit 4 or 5 of these two-room hovels together, they were in the poorest quarter. Vibrant with plant life though, that was something. Having been forced to interact with the less well-off members of society, which was practically the only kind of person who would willingly and enthusiastically throw themselves into Shin-Toriku and Tanaka the lion's cruel menagerie of human animals, Naruto recognized the Haven Quarter by the stench of the irony. However, it was impossible to ignore the sheer amount of Bakushin, Black Ocean mercenaries, heavily armed and armored unlike last time, roaming the buildings and knocking on doors. They were combing, looking for someone. He eased the shutters a little, turning down an oil lamp near them. Naruto knew very well who they were looking for. A shadow detached from a wall near a squadron of Bakushin, and it resolved through weak lanterns the immense form of Surayu, the currently undefeated gutter knife champion, and right-hand man of Tanaka and Shin. His huge odachi was unsheathed and dragging on the ground. Naruto shivered, ducking as he watched Surayu's head turn, scanning. Fuck. Chio, Kaz, and Naruto all traded looks. Kazan was slightly more confused, but he understood the mood, if not the specifics. They all knew it was only a matter of time before they were found, or the food ran out. There is some good news though. Kaz and Chio both turned to him with eerily identical looks. Naruto knew skepticism when he saw it. But all he could see was his glorious maybe solution. I think I found a fix for some of my chakra problems. That's good, right? Kaz let out a sigh, turning back to his art. Chio muttered. Really feelin' the love and appreciation for my brilliance in this room right now. Chio and Kaz ignored him. Naruto sighed, trying not to think of Kagaya, and shivered. Great, one more problem to add to the fat list. / Commerce Quarter. / Hoziki City. / Land of Fire. Gecko Hate. A shinobi was never nervous. Thus, Gecko Hate was not nervous. Rubbing his outer breast pocket, Hate fiddled with the back of the lapel on his new suit. It was perfectly fitted, yes, and cost a small fortune in Rio and happened to be the finest piece of clothing he had ever owned, all things considered, but it just didn't sit right in the collar. Which was impossible. But it was. Thus fiddling with it was entirely justified and definitely not a sign that one of the newest Jonin-level shinobi in Konohagakure's military was anything resembling anxious. No, it wasn't like his whole career was riding on this promising lead, no, definitely not. Promising and also the only lead he had left. No, he definitely did not have anything as pedestrian as a common emotion called nerves. Despite the fact Hate felt far more comfortable with a blade in hand and a blood-covered uniform and Konoha flak jacket than he'd ever be in a suit, regardless of how well tailored, this wasn't a situation he had any control over, and that was what this was about. Hate despised not having control. No, Hate sighed, this wasn't about the suit. As he watched the sturdy, well-polished bas-relief-covered doors to the head administrator's office of the Department of Child Welfare for any sign of opening, he acknowledged only to himself that this was about the fact he'd been searching for what seemed like weeks to find any lead regarding the young boy named only Naruto. Long blonde hair. Whisker marks on his face, no doubt lean, pale, about 4 feet tall, and last time Hate had counted, the boy was 9. All this for one boy. Hate endured. Yuzuki was waiting for him. His Hokage was counting on him. Naruto might well be counting on him. This had to go well. Please, Kami, grant me this small mercy. Normally, he wasn't a man that believed in any power higher than chakra, but seeing Bijou and the Seifuku-sha made him question what he thought he knew about the world around him, and what place he had in it. Maybe there really were gods and goddesses? The doors opened and other thoughts fled. Hoziki City's Department of Child Welfare, or DCW, was located in the city center, in the commerce center, almost next door to the daimyo's palace, on the 3rd floor of a 40-story building filled to the brim with various other governmental functions. The man he was here to see must have been a very important cog in the very important system indeed to have what appeared to be. In the room Hate could see through the double doors blocked by a thin man smiling brightly, an incredibly sumptuous office. Curious. Interesting indeed, because none of the other administrators had such a rarefied office space, Hayata had checked, despite many other departments being far more integral to the running of the actual city and country, at that. At first glance, it seemed that Gerald's information may have been about to bear fruit. Mr. Satama, I presume? Welcome, welcome. Hate stood slowly, remembering his cover name of Hate Satama. He brushed his jacket and smiled back after a short bow. Wonderful to meet you, Administrator Amato. The man's secretary, a rather severe woman who had given him the eye like a bird fixed on a worm for the last 20 minutes, was stationed at a desk next to the doorway and seemed none too pleased by the cordial greetings. Administrator Amato waved her away without looking at her and held the door open, still smiling. Come, Mr. Satama, I am very eager to hear what you have to say. Get us some of that fine tea, Ritsa, will you? She was already forgotten as the two walked into what Hate now knew for certain was a nice office. Recessed into several of the pillars that anchored large clear glass panes looking out over the perfume quarter were alcoves with the bust of the daimyo set into each. Light and open, the room was dominated by a monstrous behemoth of a desk that had almost nothing on it besides a name plate with Yoshio Amato, head of the Department of Child Welfare, stamped in dark lettering on a gold plate. A corner of the office held 2 single-seat chairs that screamed decadence, and a love seat completing a triangle-shaped seating area. Fine crystal flutes on the wall nearest them held no doubt expensive liquors in a wet bar that seemed extravagant. Hate sat in the proffered seat across from Amato's desk, unsnapped his bottom suit button, and crossed his legs, sitting and watching the administrator settle behind his desk. The man folded his hands, still smiling, and he couldn't help but notice how fine of a coat Yoshio was wearing. Easily the equal to the one Hate just had made. Blue with delicate pinstriping, it was an exquisite suit as those things go, not that Hate knew anything regarding a fine cut. What completed the look was a gold-plated chronograph that could not be less than 700,000 ryo, well beyond the means of a simple department head. No calluses on the hands, no real muscle to speak of, no, not a plant or a foreign shinobi. Administrator Amato continued talking and smiled all the while. So I understand you are here as the go-between, if you will, for a rather secretive and wealthy client. They seek a specific adoption, I gather? Hate smiled. Something seemed off, rather oily about this fellow, from the perfectly white teeth, to the thin pencil-like mustache, or perhaps it was the coif hairdo that looked entirely ridiculous on a man that dealt with such heartbreaking and serious matters as the welfare of the children of this city. One look outside, even just to the alleys abutting this very building, and Hate knew there was enough work for a lifetime. And enough sorrow. This man didn't look like he had a care in the world. Yes, but before I begin, I gather a powerful man like yourself understands the importance of discretion in matters of a delicate nature? Even before he'd finished speaking, that quaff was swaying. Oh yes, Mr. Saitama. In fact. The door opened and the weaselly secretary came bustling in with a steaming tray and several scones which she set down on Mr. Amato's desk. Thank you, Ritsa, that'll be all. No dictation dash? No, thank you, Ritsa, I'll handle it myself, that will be all. The look she threw over her shoulder at Hate could have been a fire jutsu for all it was burning through his shoulder blades. What is her problem? As I was saying, Mr. Saitama, I deal with high-profile adoptions all the time. I'm not saying this is the case in your client's situation, but often we have the honor of a proper bloodline to consider in regards to wealth-based lineage disputes. Thus, these things can get contentious. Right. Well, I feel more comfortable already. In fact, I can tell your word is an iron bond priceless to a wealthy man like my client. Perhaps I'll skip ahead to the problem at hand? If it was possible, the man was smiling even wider. Didn't his face hurt? Hate folded his hands and leaned back. Oh yes, I'm more than willing to offer assurances that whatever is spoken about in this room is absolutely confidential. I assure you, sir, that Yoshio Amato is a man of integrity. I must be, for the children, you see? The man turned and looked out at the city. It is all for the children. Hate almost gagged. Hate continued, trying to keep his face smiling. Then I'm obliged to tell you that I represent the wealthiest man in the city. Shintoriku and his wife, Tatsuana, have an exceptional circumstance. Amato turned back slowly, his smile faltering for the first time. Got him. You see, they recently adopted a boy from another country. Lady Tatsuana has philanthropic ties to. Hate cut off, clearing his throat. Well, that's not important. What is important is that she just fell in love with this child who lost his parents in a tragic accident and brought him back here. Hate watched as Mr. Amato's oily smile sputtered and died for good, but Hate said nothing about it. You understand, given how smart of a man you are, Mr. Amato, that my lady and my patron unfortunately had some small trouble with this child. He has run away, you see, and this is quite a feral city. Yoshio pursed his lips to almost a bloodless nothing. They wish him to be found and returned to them. Lady Tatsuana is quite inconsolable. The boy will need to have all his information in order as well, do you see, Administrator? The Jonin-turned fake businessman pulled a sealing scroll from his suit pocket and ran some chakra through it to materialize the duffel bag he'd been authorized to stuff full of hundreds of thousand Rio notes. Enough to buy a palatial country estate. Hate opened the zipper just enough and watched Yoshio Amato's greedy little eyes bug out to the size of tennis balls. The man was sweating profusely and his office was at a comfortable temperature. I trust Mr. Toriku and his lady can count on you to facilitate our arrangement. Yoshio coughed into his hand and recovered himself admirably. Yes, well, I sense some hesitation on your part, Administrator Amato. Does this task seem onerous? I assure you, the man I work for is not one to be disappointed, despite how easygoing he seems. Lady Tatsuana far less so, I'm afraid, and I told them both that you were the key player to speak with to ensure success. Hate stood, rebuttoning his jacket. He desummoned the duffel bag full of cash into the scroll and replaced it in his pocket. I will have assurances from you, Mr. Amato. Whether here now or later on at your place of residence, surrounded by your family. What say you? Amato paled at this and swallowed. Right, yes, of course. Please convey my, sincerest assurances to both Lady Toriku and your master. However, it will take some time to find this Naruto, you said? Hate simply stared. I don't believe I said his name. Inside, Hate was crowing. Success. Yoshio continued, swallowing. Say a week? The Jonin let the silence drag until it was far too much, then. Very well. This is acceptable. He slapped the first half of payment on the table. Perhaps this would keep him from ratting Hate out immediately to who he suspected was on the other end of this. Quite a pleasure. I see my trust was not misplaced after all. Pleased indeed, as I'm sure my employers both will be too. Good day, Administrator Amato. Hate bowed and walked slowly towards the door. It was time. Reaching inside himself, he pushed and pulled and spun his chakra out in fine threads, invisible to Yoshio Amato, and crafted a genjutsu, his specialty that would be exceedingly difficult for anyone short of an Uchiha to parse, that showed Hate exiting the room. Now, the second part. Tapping into the optic nerve, Gecko Hate tweaked a chakra matrix that fooled Yoshio Amato into believing there was no one in the room but him. Patience. That was what this part of the plan now required. That and no one else coming into the room. Otherwise, he'd have to extend himself even further. Doable, but difficult. This was much preferred. Hate watched as the prick did exactly what he thought he'd do. The man immediately dialed someone else. He watched as Yoshio connected and frantically attempted to get it all out at once. But before the conversation could go any further than bare details, the door opened and Hate cursed softly, still weaving. He readied a third thread, coiled like a snake waiting. I'm sorry, my lord Auric. Yes, I'll have to call you back. Pause. Yes, of course. No, my lord. With a click, Hate's hopes of getting out who this weasel was working for died a premature death. In walked a truly fat man, immense rolls only barely covered by the widest suit he'd ever seen. Hate had done his research and knew this man was Big Yusuke, known as a Yakuza associate. Rumors swirled about his work in some of the darker trades known to mankind. The kind the head of the Department of Child Welfare should have been directly working against. Clearly the man wasn't. How far did this go? His genjutsu thread struck, spearing directly into his target, Big U, before he could realize there was anyone else in the room. Nothing happened, which was exactly what he wanted. The two carried on speaking like there wasn't a third person standing not too far away leaning against the wall. Hey boss, update. Amato snapped. Close the door first, idiot. Big U didn't even look fazed or surprised, merely closing the door before settling his considerable bulk in the same chair that Hate had sat in. The man took 1 cup of the cooling tea that Ritza brought in 2 fingers the size of Earth Country sausages. You'd said you wanted an update, yeah? Well, I got it. An update, that is, on the kid? Like Lord Orochimaru wanted? Hate's heart fairly leapt out of his chest and exited the room before he could calm it down. Orochimaru? S-class threats were classified as such because of their threat to the continued existence of the village. Existential crises, most would say. Orochimaru was one of the few individuals labeled an S-class threat to the village, right up there with the bijou in damage potential. Last known position? Righteous anger suffused Hate, taking his breath away with the strength of it. Last known position was Iron Country, in the company of the Seifuku-sha. That man was still hunting Naruto, which meant he wasn't too far off. Or was this a giant coincidence, 2 threads meeting accidentally? No, that was ridiculous and absurd. The two kept speaking, unmindful of the fact Hate was having a conniption. Pause. Before you tell me this new update, I have news myself. News that I'm going to ask you to take care of quickly. Did you see the man leaving when you exited? Tall? Mouse? Utterly forgettable in a suit? Big U shook his head. Nah, I didn't see nobody. Amato waved a hand. Regardless, that man came to me with an undoubtedly fake proposition regarding the same boy that Lord Orochimaru had me looking out for, and who I found not 3 hours ago, when Master Shin's gutter blew up. Hate was stunned. So, clearly was Big U. What? What? Amato stood and started to pace, wiping his forehead with an expensive coat sleeve. He got increasingly louder and more incensed. Yes, you. As we speak, there is practically a citywide manhunt for the 9-year-old boy who messily slit Sakumugato's son's throat. Lionel, I might remind you, is the sole heir to Sakuma's 100 billion real fortune. No, if what this unbelievably Violet Street urchin's adventure can be believed, he then proceeded to kill close to half the guards and mercenaries sent to subdue him. Big U whistled. Kid's awesome. The vein on Amato's head that appeared sometime in the last hour pulsed. No, Yusuke. He is not awesome. He's a major pain in my ass and may get both of us killed if he keeps this up. What part of this don't you get? Big U seemed unimpressed, continuing to sip his tea. Supposedly, my source says the boy had help from a medical ninja hired by Master Shin to tend his gutter knives. I'm not sure I believe that, as there is bad information floating around. All I know, here, he turned and bit his lip, shaking his head, all I know you is that we can have a third party here fucking things up. Loose ends stink up ships. Big U cocked his head. Not sure that's the phrase exactly, boss. He shook his head, finished his tea in a gulp, and stood before Amato exploded. I get it though, boss. I'll kill him for ya. Yoshio whirled and the vein continued to pulse. I don't just want you to kill him, I want you to find out who he works for, because Lord Orochimaru was in the middle of negotiating a price for the boy with Master Shin, and then this shit happened. Who is this third party sniffing around for a boy named after a goddamn ramen ingredient? For that matter, why is this boy so important? I have 15 more like him waiting to be sold. I don't get it. Big U made soothing motions with his dinner plate-sized hands. Alright, boss, alright. It'll be alright. I'll snap this chucklefuck's neck and then I'll go through his shit. We'll figure it out. We're still getting paid, yeah? Amato nodded absently. Yeah, then that's that. I'll see ya, boss. In the meantime, drink some of that tea, yeah? It's delicious. That snack Ritza makes a mean tea. At that, Amato made a face and waved again, a weak flapping gesture, but then stopped, whirling on Big U. Make sure you, above all else, that we find this boy before the Lord Guardians get involved. Not all of them are on the Lord's payroll, or Master Shin's. You understand? Disaster. I don't want another Shinada incident. This time, Big U waved and left. Hate was reeling. This was huge. Too big for him to handle. He needed to contact the Rokudame. Naruto was dead in the next few hours if they didn't do something. /Haven Quarter. /Hoziki City. /Land of Fire. Naruto. The doorframe, windows, and empty refrigerator rattled with the force of the slammed door. To her credit, Chiyo looked slightly chagrined as she came in like a whirlwind, genjutsu melting from a plain-looking middle-aged woman to an incredibly wrinkled crone. Well, the last one was actually her. Naruto didn't have the courage to mutter any of his thoughts out loud, despite how grumpy and annoyed she'd seemed ever since he'd seen Sarayu was hunting for them. She didn't apologize for scaring the ever-loving shit out of Naruto and Kazan both, though. He'd sworn that the Bakushin mercenaries were about to roll over them like their namesakes. Naruto opened his mouth to ask her if she was raised by feral wolves, couldn't she knock? But an image of an irate goddess killing him because he quote-unquote disrespected her stilled his tongue. Chiyo wasn't on the same level as Kagaya, being that she was seemingly always grumpy, but it paid to be cautious. He felt that decision was very mature. Naruto moved his piece 3 spaces and yelped in glee when he realized he earned 3 more coins, greedily collecting them from the pile in the middle of the dirt-caked board. Kazan had found this game, Torbol, in an alleyway all scuffed up and missing some pieces. Afterwards, he felt terrible because the city rats only had 1 copy and Kazan had wanted to venture back out unsupervised and without a genjutsu to put it back. It was all Naruto could do to stave off that disaster. The fact he left and came back without anybody realizing it was mind-blowing and also terrifying. Like he said, maturity was rising inside him. Boy, I need to speak with you about why you're sitting on your ass and playing games with Kazan while you should be fixing the chakra issue. Her significant glance towards his notebook was not lost on him. I'm not wasting time, I'm bonding. He more felt the eye roll than saw it. Be that as it may, this is your life at stake and ours as well. I cannot be seen openly fighting in the middle of the daimyo's crown city. I'm a somewhat well-known shinobi from a country that is not fire. Naruto twisted from where he was sitting cross-legged on the ground opposite Kaz, who was frowning down at the board. There was no way he'd recognize the highly advanced maneuver Naruto was about to pull off. Why the secrecy, Chiyo? Why don't you just... I don't know, be honest with me? I told you mine, it's about time you told me yours. Chio let out a relaxed sigh as she sat on the edge of her cot on the far wall. I'll make you a deal, boy. Are you interested? Naruto's eyes bulged as he looked down at the board and realized he'd lost to Kazan. How the hell? He cleared his throat and turned, looking Chio in the eyes. I'm interested. How about you tell me about this Kagaya Otsutsuki, and then I'll tell you everything you could ever want to know about little old me. HM? Fair? Naruto broke his gaze with her and turned back to Kaz, who was rolling up the board with great care. Naruto helped him put the coins in the pouch. Quietly, he muttered something. What was that? I said, never mind. That's what I thought. Now let's discuss this fix you claimed you had. He cleared his throat, trying to buy time to figure out what to say. It was true that he had, or thought he had figured it out, but there was a small piece missing, not to mention he didn't have the supplies or a person with enough etching acumen to use the etching tool on him. He couldn't do it on himself, not unless he had some stretchy, rubbery arms like a superhero from the stories. That'd be cool. But yeah, no, he didn't have that. Unless you have access to a blacksmith, chakra metal ingots to liquefy, and a sufficiently advanced fuensmith, then we're out of luck. So, just kidding? Chio gave him the flattest look he could ever remember being given in his short life. First off, Kazan brought a bunch of random junk from his work in the smithy at Shin's. Second, there's a blacksmith in the Commerce District, one gate over from where we sit. As for the other things... She trailed off, one finger tapping her chin, absently looking at Kazan. As for the other things, give me sufficient time and I'll think of something. Ever wonder how you eat a plains buffalo? Even Kaz's face was screwed into a funky look at the incredibly bizarre non sequitur. I'm surrounded by idiots, and I can't decide who's worse. At least Kazan has an excuse. She sighed. You eat a plains buffalo one bite at a time. We can't do the other things unless we accomplish each of these smaller tasks. Let's focus on figuring out what we do have. Kaz lumbered over to his enormous backpack and brought it to Naruto, dropping it with a clanking rattle that sounded like he brought half a smithy with him. Naruto appended it on the floor, and it proved more difficult than expected. This weighs a ton. But the reason for that soon proved apparent. Ingots, darkened ores, and various other raw minerals tumbled out. Kaz, you big beautiful weirdo. Naruto sifted through the junk with his fingers and realized some of them were drawstring pouches of various sizes, one of which contained, of all things, various cleaning supplies, powders, rags, and small tubs of oil. Underwear, a towel, various pens and inks capped and placed gently in a small wooden box. Random shit was stuffed in a dozen different pockets. How the hell did he get all this stuff? In another pouch, larger this time, lay the very thing he had been looking for. Kaz grinned, lighting up his whole body. Naruto couldn't help but laugh. The etcher. But his breath caught when he saw what was at the bottom of the pile. 2 palm-sized silver-veined ingots of chakra metal. Originally, these were used for the forging of a full-blooded gutter knife's actual knife. Each one received their knife during the blooding ceremony. Chakra metal was expensive, so they only had a few pieces lying around and Kazan had nicked enough to buy a small mansion in the country. Kami. Like a furnace radiated heat, Chio fairly hummed with smug satisfaction. Yeah, Granny, well, this doesn't exactly solve all our problems, does it? I need to spend some time creating a stable fueling out of these babies. She was clearly undaunted. I have faith in you, boy. What about all that shit you gave me for this idea, calling me an idiot? Very true. It is definitely stupid, even terminally idiotic, to attempt to create an entirely new fuinjutsu based on something you probably saw in a very vivid nightmare. Yes, stupid. She leaned in and he could smell her old person scent, garlic, and that weird soap she used. One could say, a feat of stupidity made infinitely more moronic by the fact you are attempting to put the product of your mad brain on your spinal column. Yes, we've reached rarefied air in your attempts to fatally outstupid the rest of humanity. Damn, Granny is harsh. She started quietly clapping. Naruto threw up his hands. If you think it's such a bad idea, Why the hell did you even tell me to solve this one problem at a time? Naruto had the faint sensation that she now thought him even dumber. Because every great idea starts out looking stupid to others, boy. That's innovation. You do the impossible, yes? You ignore what people think they know and you prove them wrong. She folded her arms and snorted. Well, I'm waiting. Sneaking through the various patrols of Bakushin, panicking to avoid Tsuraya, and then ducking away from some menacing-looking people in weird embroidered sashes took the better part of 2 hours. Only, when Naruto did find a blacksmith, it took another 4 tedious hours to prove his competence by creating a barrel stave as quickly and effectively as he could. Then, and only then, did the master of the forge, an intense fellow by the name of Tandrik, let him perform the complicated and highly secretive process that iron fuensmiths had been perfecting for 1,000 years, ultimately ending up with 8 ounces of silvery, metallic liquid that would form the basis of the etching ink. Hiding that involved using some of the money Chiyo had liberated from Shin to bribe Tandrik not to come into that side of the forge. Then it took him another couple of hours to sneak back across, well, enemy lines, so to speak, because a patrol stopped to beat the ever-loving shit out of a man who refused to let the 4-man squad in to check the apartment. Luckily, or maybe not so luckily for them, a dozen men with what looked like table legs and various heavy implements took the moral quandary right out of his hands and proceeded to return the favor fourfold on the surprised squad of Gato's Black Ocean mercenaries. Somehow, a fire started and the small incident turned into a big incident. Big like, the entire Haven quarter turned out in droves hunting for more Bakushin. Naruto would swear up and down this wasn't his fault. Naruto heard, rather than saw, the righteous band of citizens find Tsuraya and his guards. He hurried to the shack as fast as he could. They clearly didn't have much time. Naruto took one look at Chiyo's face as he came upon the barely their front door and said, "Don't even start. The goddamn day I've had." He pushed past her with the ink vial clutched in one hand and fairly gulped down water from the huge plastic bottle Kaz had clutched in his hands. Chiyo shut the door and turned. Success? Naruto grinned around the mouth of the bottle, giving a thumbs up. Screaming and wailing in the clash of arms was barely audible over the fire crackling in the hearth. Now I just need to fix the last issue with the symbology equivalency and loop. Don't know how she handled that, but it's on the tip of my brain. Is that a phrase people say? No, it's not. And I trust you realize I cannot help you with that part, boy. I have no small skill in the art of fuinjutsu, but the task you're undertaking. She shook her head and sat back in her usual spot, across from Kazan who was working on something. He couldn't quite tell from his spot aimlessly pacing like a caged tiger in the center of the room. Bowls with caked rice and chicken were stacked on a desk Naruto had been using to write in his recently appropriated notebooks. It's almost beyond me. And I've messed about with bijou seals. I guess that means we're both stupid, huh, Granny? She looked like she swallowed a lemon. Naruto grinned. The notebook was open and a picture showed facing up. Clouds like some volcanic smoky quartz glimmered with inner light, a boiling thunderstorm producing jagged forking blasts of lightning that connected sky and ground. Naruto had never beheld a more amazing natural sight like that in his short life lived mostly underground, well, except for that time he'd lived through one in the wild. Almost caked his pants during that experience. Lightning was power. Lightning was majesty in motion. The second those plasma channels opened, charged ions transmitted power from sky to ground in a billionth of a second. Naruto remembered Yojimba talking about the various elements, and their strengths and weaknesses. Yojimba had laughed when Naruto began to obsess over how cool it would be to throw lightning around like some god of the sky. Naruto stood up, his chair flying backward. Lightning. Hunching over the notebook filled with his work, Naruto reworked the feedback elements, and introduced some fundamental symbological matrices that changed the overall nature of what he was trying to accomplish. There was something happening in his brain, but he had the Kami-given feeling that he'd succeeded. These symbols, together just so, made sense. It would work. And Naruto stared as he finally understood what his Uzumaki heritage had given him. Unlimited access to success in the pursuit of fuinjutsu if he merely put the work in and never gave up this ability, the means to check for correctness, to ascertain success or failure of a given created fuinjutsu? That was what had killed his entire people. Everything, and he meant everything, in their world now ran off of already established fuinjutsu matrices. People didn't understand, not really, what fuinjutsu was other than its purported functions. It was a thing that did something, that was it. But the Uzumaki had understood down to the last atom. Fuinjutsu products were a license to print money, and the greed of those seeking a license to print money had killed the only possible avenue to innovation. Rumors had abounded, and even Master Aoran had heard them, that the Uzumaki leashed bijou, chained an actual god, and found a secret to boosting their own powers with fuin marks. The Uzumaki hadn't sought war or the death of others, except what Kan Hagakure had asked of them for general defense. No, they'd used fuinjutsu, in their wisdom, to improve the lives of everyone. No patents. No money changed hands. Just free sharing of ideas to make the world better. Fuin was everywhere. We used it to power auto cars, the vaunted autobus, to power flying machines, to pave roads between countries, to clean water and redistribute it, and even to supply city power grids with ambient chakra. He had even used a fuin matrix to heat ramen in 3 minutes or less. Rage flooded him and his fists clenched. He blinked at the sudden pain and found his fist bleeding, stuck halfway into the wooden boards facing his desk. Kazan and Chio gaped at him. A part of him was ashamed that he didn't know more about his heritage, about either his mother or father, despite the little he did know of the Uzumaki lineage. And because of what he did know of the Uzumaki, Naruto felt they wouldn't remotely approve of fuinjutsu use like this. The samurai definitely would find this anathema to everything they taught, a violation of the oath of the sage. But another part of him, a darker part, felt that the world deserved to learn what the fuinjutsu of the Uzumaki could do unleashed, turned to destruction. The peace-loving artists they'd scorned and wiped out. Surely doing a bad thing for a good reason, that made it right, right? Would Mifune have understood? Naruto scowled. No, he wouldn't have understood. He was, after all, the man who let the Seifuku-sha in to slaughter his people and kill every person Naruto had ever loved. No, Mifune wouldn't understand, and maybe that was a good thing. He wouldn't end up like that man, a coward afraid to use the tools in front of him to get the job done. Naruto? He turned. Chio had a strange look on her face. Are you okay? Your hand is bleeding. Give it to me. I'll be fine. We have work to do. Naruto cut off Chio's response as he turned to Kazan. Kaz. Naruto moved to his best friend and turned him so they were face to face. It was hard looking in those vulnerable green eyes. Naruto gave him the notebook, with the drawing outlined and looking like intricate beads on a string. If the beads were concentric rings of fuin symbols connected by more and more matrices down a length that would lead from where his neck met his shoulder blades all the way down to the dimples near his buttocks. Kaz, I need you to copy what I've written here onto my skin. Naruto picked up the etcher, a needle gun specially designed, filled, and ready with the liquid metal. You are the only person I can trust with this. Those green eyes looked horrified. The needle would not be kind if he was to penetrate the upper layers of skin far enough. Kaz knew this. He'd done some light metal etching work using a regular heated knife. Naruto continued to try to tell himself this was the same thing. Naruto gripped Kazan's hands, which were shaking, and pinned them. They strained against each other. He knew Kaz didn't want to ever disappoint him. His friend was nothing if not straightforward about his loyalty, and you couldn't put any kind of price on that. Naruto had found that out firsthand. Images of Yojimba throwing his broken self at Orochimaru to let Aoran and him escape flashed through his head, and it was everything he could do not to howl with sheer loathing. This was what he had to do. No one else could. No one else would. This would be only his first step. Naruto's grip tightened. Kaz, please. Naruto whispered, but Kaz was already crying silently. The sounds of battle outside formed an odd counterpoint. Chio simply watched. In the end, Naruto had known it had to be Kazan, and it seemed he knew it too. In a weird trance, Naruto took his vest off and set it aside as Kaz cleared the desk. He climbed atop it and lay face down, just fitting with only a bit of his feet hanging off. Chio cleared her throat, but Naruto interrupted her as he stared down from his place on the table. Save it, Granny. She scowled. Don't call me that, boy. Her voice softened. I was going to say you're going to need this. She proffered a stick. Before Naruto realized what was happening, shiny threads of something snapped out of her like 1,000 spiderwebs, latching onto his limbs, and he was pinned. Naruto could almost smell the chakra. Every muscle in his body was frozen stiff, though she left his mouth open. What the hell, Granny? Stop being a baby. You don't want your jerking around and whining to blow us and half the city up, do you? If he slips? Naruto stilled and Kez made a sound in the back of his throat. Frightened or annoyed, he couldn't tell. TCH, fine. Chio fit the stick between his teeth. The wood tasted of ashes. He tilted his head at Kaz and tried to smile. Chio smiled at him, but it was fragile. TG Choit. At first Naruto didn't feel anything, then his neck started getting warm, then he felt it. The needle pierced his skin. That wasn't so bad. He'd had to show Kaz how you used the etcher, first placing the needle, next you penetrated with the lip and injected the liquid. So this was the penetration, next was the... What felt like molten metal crawled inside him and... Naruto screamed. The stick snapped. The chakra threads tightened, freezing his mouth. Everything went white in his head. /Haven Quarter. /Hoziki City. /Land of Fire. Tanaka the Lion. There were many strange things afoot this night. Not the least of them was that the rain felt more like continuous walls moving horizontally, than true rain, driving so hard that it left lines on his vision as he stared at the ominous black clouds rolling through Hoziki City. Very few people would want to be out in this deluge, and those who were surely had a need. No one would willingly choose to venture into a monsoon like this. Tanaka eyed the men surrounding him and Master Toriku, hand-picked and well-trained as any standing army. No, not willingly are we out here. But their very reputation was at stake. No one came into the gutter and knifed one of their own, though privately he believed that sick child had gotten what he deserved, but Gato, the patron of his patron, believed otherwise. His son was still alive barely, but who knew what the fates had decreed for such an evil child? Perhaps he would die this night. The omens were quite right for such ill things. Master Torika commanded, Tanaka obeyed, no matter how much he regretted losing the sheer atmospheric heights of potential that little boy had harbored within. Tanaka fancied himself a sculptor of potential, and nowhere had he ever seen a more beautiful or pure marble like what Naruto represented. It was ever so that the flaw made the whole piece stronger. Yes, crippled he may have been, it just meant that he needed more encouragement to strain to reach the heights he and Shin had both seen during that first encounter. Sarayu had been put on the back foot. Temporarily, yes, but that opponent was a 9-year-old boy with what seemed a curiously strong foundation. Thus, that potential was squandered as here he was, along with the best the gutter had to offer, hunting the lion's dream down, and slaying it like knights beset the dragons of yore. Part of him wished they wouldn't find him. But Tanaka knew it was a matter of time. Stranger still was that the guardians hadn't interfered yet, though he knew they would. Whatever force caused them such hesitancy wouldn't prevent the end. There was much about this he didn't understand. Not the least was how their own Irionen was so moved to aid the boy and his idiot friend in their escape. What felt power did Naruto have that convinced loyal servants to jump ship in such a suicidal endeavor? A messenger came to a huffing stop nearby, one of their apprentice gutter knives. Yuruchi, was his name? Master Shin, Master Tanaka, we think we got him. The boy showed almost no excitement about that fact. Noted. Master Shin, from where he sat under a makeshift open-faced tent, only shifted slightly in response. Tanaka knew he was to take point. Master Shin was that rarest of creatures in that he hired people more capable than him to do a job, and when he did so, he trusted them implicitly, never attempting to steal the credit due, always deferring. One of the many reasons he'd agreed to work with this genius man so many years ago now. Hopefully, their partnership would last far into both their eventual retirements. The lion never disappointed, after all. Yurichi, yes, that was his name, spoke quickly at Tanaka's prompting. Master, we missed them in the first sweep. The boy pointed up from the wide courtyard they directed the tent, towards an elevated position squeezed in among the terraced housing complexes that characterized the Haven Quarter. They are holed up in a small caretaker's shack on Chisu Way, by the cathedral. Leather armor creaking from its age despite his careful diligence with the oil, Tanaka loosened his short swords in their sheaths. Time and regret were his two oldest companions, short-bladed weapons that had served him through almost 2 world wars and countless individual duels. If everything went right today, he wouldn't need to even draw them. Best to be safe. Move our men into position. Sarayu has orders from the gutter master. Grand Oyabungato must have visible proof of death. We bring the head, but Sarayu is to engage. Torin will wait back with you and the others. Are those orders understood? Repeat them back word for word. Yurichi, to his credit, barely stumbled. Very well. The most important thing is for us to bring him in dead or alive. Impress this upon Sarayu. It must be us. Go now. Shin and Tanaka both watched him go, watched the conference, watched Sarayu fairly vibrating with suppressed anticipation. His master's voice was quiet, but it cut through the rain like no other. Strong, iron, but faintly worried. That was new. Tanaka, old friend, I trust you without reservation. I trust one need not remind you that we are on, let's say, thin ice with Grand Oyabungato? Tanaka nodded. You are worried, Gutter Master? Thaw. Dispense with that nonsense when it is just us two. Shin turned, pinning him with the stare that had made men soil themselves, made fearsome fighters cower. But he was worried now, and that brought a sharing of burdens that made them equal for a time. Gato has brought a man, a shinobi, from Mist. He paused. I dare say. He frightens me, Tanaka. We must have the boy dead, or in their custody before this man finds him. I want this business put behind us as quickly as possible. It was all Tanaka could do not to goggle at the man he'd known for close to 30 years. In all of those he never professed to being frightened. Not aloud. Shin continued speaking. Pray this man, this Raiga Kurosaki, isn't turned on us for failure. Which is exactly what will happen if Sakuma's son dies on the operating table, and we fail to catch this child. Hook or by crook, blame must not fall on the gutter. Tanaka simply nodded. Both turned to watch the rain, falling in buckets, turning the world into a smoky hot soup. Everything turned around, capturing Naruto. Everything. Gentlemen, excuse me, do you have a permit to create a temporary dwelling? Tanaka and Shin turned as one to see two men, one bald, wearing the robes of a shinobi monk, a questioner, and the other a rather nondescript brown-haired fellow in a suit. No one would have taken a second glance at the fellow on the right, but Tanaka wasn't just anyone. Tanaka smiled as he beheld the sash emblazoned with the symbol of the daimyo's personal guard, a phoenix and sword against a tree in full bloom on a red and white checkered background. The symbol of the Lord Guardians. No one they expected or wanted to meet, but needs must. The man in the suit stepped forward. My name is Gecko Hate, an associate of Sakumagato, and I believe you pursue my charge? The man nodded to the calm Lord Guardian next to him. Lord Guardian Chiriku is here to assume custody, post haste. Shin turned and merely looked at Tanaka. It went without saying they couldn't allow this, but they also couldn't contest both the daimyo's right hand and Gato's. There was a third option, and it fell right in their lap, preventing undue blame. Tanaka pointed up at where the sounds of crashing blades and screaming had started up. I believe he can be found up there with a small number of my men. Shall I accompany you? Chapter 11, A Shaping. Naruto. Rough hands were shaking him and every nerve in his body screamed in white-hot agony. Naruto, wake up, boy. We have to go. Kazan, grab the bag. No, forget it. Go, child. Naruto felt himself being scooped in what he imagined were frail arms, but they felt more like iron clamps. He couldn't even open his eyes and his back felt like some rough giant from the fairy tales had done 9 rounds in a dueling pit, but spent most of the time just stomping on him again and again. Every muscle spasmed, every fiber of him cried out, and he felt tears wetting his face. Why? The motion, violent and forceful, encouraged him to open his eyes, and he really wished he hadn't. Chio had used some weird shinobi trick to throw them from a dead stop outside the shack to the very rooftops of the homes. 3 stories. How? But the answer was what it always was, chakra. He kept forgetting she was a badass shinobi, not just a useless medical ninja. Put me down, Granny, I'm not a cripple. No, not anymore. Naruto smiled to himself, then winced, spine aching like a giant man had beaten him to a pulp. If he did that jumping thing one more time in the arms of someone, he'd paint the walls with the weak soup they'd had for lunch. Like hell you can, boy, you can barely fight off a strong fart, let alone Sarayu and half the gutter knives. Tanaka is here for you himself, boy. Tanaka. Torin. Yurichi. Sarayu. How much time do we have? She eyed the almost set sun, shading her eyes from the deluge of water. Monsoon season was truly upon them, today of all days. It would help as much as hurt. Not much, I'd say. I have no idea where the Lord Guardians are or why they don't care that there are Miss Shinobi in the city as well as gutter knives running rampant. We have to move. Nobody even had time to respond as Sarayu, known famously among the people as the Lightning Dragon, burst out of the alleyway ahead of them. The 3 of them took, and Sarayu's angry shout followed them. They ran through twists and turns, ending up behind the local cathedral. Naruto felt fairly okay now, though the ache in his back and jaw was throbbing. He wasn't nauseous anymore. He felt ready for a fight. No point running so far. They ended up in an ambush, after all. Sarayu definitely wouldn't expect him to throw himself into the jaws of the enemy, and maybe, with the new lightning mark. Granny, get Kaz away from here. I'll meet you by Sunshine Court, near the fountain. Go! And Naruto threw himself at this man who featured in several nightmares without even a second's hesitation. Sarayu only looked up in surprise as he turned the corner, and Naruto's booted foot took the man in the chin and didn't seem to do much other than piss him off, so he back-flipped off the man's face and landed in the mud, realizing he was still shirtless. That made 2 of them. Chio and Kazan ducked away at a dead run, and a part of him relaxed. Serpentine and intricately scaled, the azure dragon that gave the gutter's current champion his name stretched from the hard, muscled edges of his hip bone and wrapped all the way around his body, terminating around his neck. The eyes of the mystical beast glimmered out of his chest like some kami-granted parasite. It was awesome. Naruto grinned. I was hoping I'd find you here, you and Torin and that pissant Yurichi. Just me, boy, sorry to disappoint. Those others aren't far behind, though. He adjusted the massive odachi on his shoulder. Neither spoke. They both knew what needed to happen. But Naruto couldn't resist. I have something I've been dying to show you, asshole. Sarayu cocked a blue eyebrow. He'd clearly dyed his whole head blue like his namesake, a ponytail stretching to his mid-back. Like stretching an atrophied muscle, Naruto felt around inside his shattered chakra system and imagined the series of symbologies linked together that represented the mark, one intricately woven matrix of Fuinjutsu symbologies that would grant him a facsimile of a reinforcement technique, and mentally flipped the switch. If he could have seen his spine, circles of Fuinjutsu were spread in a connected index straight down his back and were lit from within, like an inner storm. Agony spread from him again, compounding on top of the still present fire that raged through his muscles, under his skin, and he dropped to one knee screaming as tiny, molten knives prickled him over and over again, running up and down his spine in waves. He stayed knelt, a fist pressed into the mud. Rain continued to slam, nice and cool against his feverish back, and served to show him how the world had changed. Sarayu laughed, watching him fall in agony. That's a great trick, boy. I've always wanted to be able to fall on my ass at a moment's notice without giving a shit, too. The odachi rose, a broken and battered thing, but more fearsome for its age, the edge glimmering in the faint streetlight, the tinkling of rain on metal. The rain seemed to have slowed down, not a lot, but enough to notice. A faint glow shone around him, nothing wild or intense, but it was steady, certainly nothing like the piece of Fuinjutsu that made him glow blue that he'd scrapped for being useless, but the light was enough to notice above his skin in the waning dark. The sword descended. Naruto waited, then slipped past it easily and was inside the man's guard in an instant, close enough to notice the widening of the man's eyes. But they hardened and Sarayu reacted, just not fast enough. Naruto mimicked their first fight and slammed the edge of his boot down on the man's instep and slipped to his right side, grabbing the arm raising to cradle his foot, and put his hand on the back of the man's head, shoving it as hard as he could into a rising knee. Wily, Sarayu slipped a hand in between the rising knee and his face, taking the blow, but muting the damage. Sarayu stumbled back as Naruto slipped backwards like an eel. His body tingled with energy and it felt, not quite like the reinforcements he'd used as a student back in Iron, but like something close. No extra strength, but he felt like he could run faster than he ever could before. The difference was that of running through water versus land. No resistance, smooth, gliding gracefully through the world, between raindrops almost. Naruto grinned and came in again. Sarayu was suddenly much faster, too. Not fast enough. Being on even footing was more than fine. He'd been at a distinct disadvantage last time they'd fought, and it had gone fairly well, all things considered. All the same, Naruto gritted his teeth and strained for more speed as he watched the Odachi slice sideways in a lightning-fast blow. It caught a lock of hair, but that was it. Naruto ducked, slipping underneath it, and transitioned up into a shoulder charge that pushed both Sarayu's arms off balance. Naruto sank into a horse stance, wide and balanced, tangling his front end with Sarayu's intentionally. The man toppled with a shout and the Odachi left his hands backwards, as the two of them fell together. There were shouts nearby and Naruto grimaced, struggling with the stronger man so much stronger that he couldn't believe it. Sarayu's fist took him in the chin, lifting him entirely up and throwing him back to land in a giant puddle with a splash. Head ringing, rattled and feeling a loose tooth, he spun back up into a crouch. Low-level pain had been thrumming through his whole body the entire fight, and it emanated in waves from his spine, from the Fuinjutsu mark, and it was getting worse. The more he drew from the mark, the more pain would accompany it. So how long did he really have with it? Disappointment warred with concern, but he dismissed that. This was something. The fight, if you could call it that, had only been 2 minutes at best, but there were others coming. Would the Fuinjutsu escalate the pain the more he drew chakra from his shattered coils? Or was it static? Only one way to find out though. Naruto grimaced. It was now a distinct worry. He darted past Sarayu, who tried to grab him, and plowed into another person, Yuruchi as it happened to be, who was coming around the corner of a building, up from the steps leading to the courtyard below them. Tangling with the bigger boy used to be a chore. He was quick as an eel, especially with chakra, and had muscles that dwarfed Naruto's by a large margin. Adolescence did that. But this time was different. Naruto punched Yuruchi full in the face, ignoring the deadly sword clutched in his rival's hand entirely. Well, not entirely, it had been knocked wide when Naruto threw the boy into the wall. Yuruchi was entirely unprepared. Even unprepared, he wasn't helpless. A counterpunch came fast and hard, flooring Naruto for the second time that day. Yuruchi growled. You fucking shit. I should have killed you when I had the chance. Don't care how you've gotten faster and faster. Bullshit is what that is. But you've gone and done it now, haven't ya? Naruto spit and eyed the sword clutched in Yuruchi's hands. He heard more than saw Sarayu coming up from behind. Both of them were far from out. So this needed to be quick. You were never better than Yuruchi and you know that. It would never have worked between us. The boy looked confused, but didn't answer, blurring into a slicing sweep that any sane person would have gotten away from. But Naruto could match him, exceed him, speed for speed, and he proved it, diving at Yuruchi and halting the blade by forcing a grapple for the hilt. The blade stopped, vibrating between them as Naruto and Yuruchi fought, main strength to main strength, of which Naruto had the horrible realization he had none of. The two of them staggered around drunkenly. Yuruchi pushed Naruto into a wall, and he had to take it, the wind rushing out of him. Lightning chakra raced through his body as he took stock, realizing he had only one option. Naruto pushed them both away and twisted, falling on purpose. He stopped struggling and pulled Yuruchi as hard as he could. Falling, Naruto yanked the blade point first into the mud next to his face and powered his legs into Uruchi's chest that sent the boy sailing over him and into Sarayu, who was coming from the far alleyway. The two assholes went down in a heap, cursing. Naruto started backing away towards the direction Chio and Kaz ran, but Sarayu was the first onto his feet, pushing Uruchi off. Naruto had to blink when Sarayu casually killed Uruchi with a backhanded swing of his massive sword. The Uzumaki stared as rain pounded down onto the bloody body, eyes still, wide, and staring sightlessly up at the overhangs. Why would you do that? He got in my way. The casual cruelty took his breath away, but Leon Ogato's face flashed in front of his eyes and he had to wonder what the difference really had been. Before any thought could take root, he squashed it, focusing with a twinge of guilt. Uruchi hadn't been a friend, but he hadn't really been an enemy either, had he? Torin stepped around the corner, tall, lithe, not nearly as wet as the rest, draped as he was in a dark, waterproof coat, a sword clutched in one hand, a walkie-talkie in the other. About fucking time, Torin, you little shit. Sorry, buddy, Tanaka wanted us to be thorough. There are guardians here and some asshole from the mist. I was trying to buy you time. Torin cocked his head, not smiling in the least. Is Naruto giving you trouble? He's not bad for a little shit. Tanaka was right about him. Too bad we'll never see it. Sarayu snorted, incredulous. Are you fucking serious, Tor? Tanaka thought this shit stain could surpass me? Torin winced as he saw Uruchi's body. Really, man? He was fucking it up. Torin merely nodded. We'll talk about it later. Kill him. The lightning dragon tightened his grip on his odachi and started towards Naruto. Naruto could barely think now, the pain from the mark had made it almost impossible. So he shut it off. Without the mark, maybe even with it, he couldn't fight both Torin and Sarayu, especially with only one sword. A piece of rubble, a damaged brick, lay on the ground near him. Sprinting, he scooped it up and chucked it right at Torin's stupid face. He didn't stick around to see the damage, but he did hear a furious storm of curses. Naruto tucked his tail between his legs and ran. /Haven Quarter. /Hoziki City. /Land of Fire. Chio. Shoo! Chio put her fingers to her lips as she led Kazan away from where that idiot boy threw himself at that brute, Sarayu. In her heart of hearts, she knew her self-maintained prohibition against revealing the extent of her skills, let alone doing so in the heart of Hoziki City and its Lord Guardians, was smart. But watching that boy fight when she could make all this trivial with one jutsu galled her. Was she scared? Was that it? Or was the thought of revealing herself and watching Naruto recoil in horror, realizing her legacy of carnage? She knew what he'd gone through, having a bija sealed inside him, and she'd done that very same thing to the Kazekage's son. Monstrous. It was part of why she ultimately had left, despite Ebizo's fierce protests, and Pakura's steadfast refusal to make her a missing nin. Protecting Kazan gave her some leeway in feeling like she was fulfilling her strange connection to the vicious blonde-haired, violet-eyed rascal. Which is why she stopped when she felt a powerful chakra presence approaching. Her sensory skills were rudimentary, but this was strong, her kind of strong, something none of them were quite prepared to deal with. Inside she was cursing. Outwardly relaxed, she turned to Kazan and put both old, wrinkled hands on both sides of his face. What a truly sweet boy this is. Pity what his life has been like. Listen to me carefully, Kazan. I need you to hide and do not come out until I specifically tell you that I want you out of there, or if Naruto comes to get you. Do you understand? He was quiet. Yes. First word she'd ever gotten out of him. Huh. Chio knew she would be fine no matter what came, success or failure, life or death, but these boys had worlds of life ahead of them. Kazan and Naruto must continue on, with or without her. Kazan huddled behind some iron trash receptacles at the back of the building behind her. Good boy. The presence was close, almost on top of them. A man stepped from the shadowed recess of a building, two unusual swords clutched in his hands, hood pulled up. Chio couldn't see much of his face. But the smell of ozone was suddenly everywhere, strong, potent, like she was passing through a thunderstorm. Her fear, not for her, but for them, grew. This was a powerful Miss Shinobi, the very thing Naruto had been most worried about. Was there a connection with the butcher here? Or was he here on behalf of Gato? Would he know her grandson? An old lady? Really? The man snorted and Chio realized he was enormous, easily 2 inches taller than even Kazan, who was a great big lump of a boy. Saraya would be small compared to this beast. Dark green hair fell to his waist in a careless tumble as the man pushed back his hood, revealing a rugged, cruel face with sky-blue eyes that didn't seem to fit his face. Too beautiful. Those were the worst kind of killers. Beauty shouldn't be associated with something so ugly as murder. Her worst fears were realized when she noticed that he wore the traditional Kiri uniform, white mask attached to his belt, bandages racing up and down both his legs and arms, and 2 bandaged swords clutched in both hands with some dark lump attached to his back. A backpack, maybe? The mask at his belt had the characteristic red wave and mischievous, painted smile marking Kirigakure ASDS. Assassination and Special Tactics Squad, the ANBU of Mist. She could have tried talking him out of a fight, but the reality was that he most likely wasn't concerned about starting an international incident. That was simple math given that he worked for the Butcher of the Hidden Mist, the now known legitimate Kage of Mist. That man simply didn't care about the sacrosanct nature of international statutes, not if what Naruto had told her was true, and he had very little reason to mislead her about something like that. She had to at least know who she was about to kill. All I see before me is yet another young man lacking respect. Color me impressed with your bravado, boy. The man threw back his head and laughed. An old bitch with spunk, I see. Very well, my name is Raiga Kurosaki, and it seems you are just in time. A vein pulsed in her forehead, while her body went cold. Fucking brat. Nobody was allowed to call her that. But she did recognize the name. He was strong. Extremely strong. A member of the 7 Swordsmen, a squad that had many legends attached to its name. Best not to let him know she was remotely intimidated. Hey, you little snot, show some respect to your elders. I don't care one whit who you are, you old bitch! And I am showing you respect. Isn't it respectful that I'm already planning a tasteful ceremony? The bandages on his weapons unraveled as he pulled violently, streamers of wet bandaging revealing 2 extremely distinctive weapons she recognized from the bingo book, the Thunder of Kirigakure. The Kiba blades, long and straight with 2 sweeping hooks jutting out of the base steel, carved vicious furrowed wounds in their victims. Unpleasant. But not entirely problematic given who she was. Your funeral! Raiga was instantly in her face, swinging those legendary dual blades, but she'd been a shinobi far longer than he'd been alive. Chio had forgotten more about being a shinobi than this shit had ever learned. He'd soon learn. Smoke burst where Chio had stood and a gray faux-muscled faceless, featureless puppet replaced her and parried both blades by clamping down on the vicious edges without heed, stopping him in his tracks, and the golem powered a vicious snap kick into Raiga that connected with his chest, sending him careening towards the building. The look of surprise on his face warmed her tired old bones from her position behind her puppet. 1,000 tendrils of glittering chakra threads connected from each finger, and gave her combat drone life. Enough life to end Raiga's, hopefully. A white-hot bolt of lightning disintegrated the top of the building she'd sent Raiga into, and the boom almost deafened her, except she'd put a plug of pure chakra in her ears. A glowing figure stepped out of the rubble, timbers blackened and on fire, and screams punctuated his steps, rain sizzling and hissing as it hit that glowing aura. They didn't call him the Thunder of Mist for no reason. A finger twitched, and her puppet launched itself at Raiga. Dual strikes sent the puppet sideways into a wall, but it recovered, bounding to its feet as she commanded it to pressure him as much as it could. Powerful as it was the least important of the creations she carried with her. It would have to do. The others would give her away in a way she didn't want. Not yet anyway. Chio had seen Naruto's skill with a sword, for someone his age, and this man made him look like a rank amateur as he spun both blades in the whirlwind, fending off her puppet's steel hands, sparks flying. As she watched, she realized there were pieces of her precious golem flying off. The lightning chakra. It had to be. Lightning elemental chakra was this man's forte, and it showed as he sheathed the Kiba blades in a coating of elemental lightning chakra, sharpening it to a singular potency. So strong, it was able to shear steel. Her golem wouldn't last long against that onslaught. Chiyo substituted with her own puppet in a seamless instant, latching chakra threads from the now lifeless golem to the blades Raiga cared about more than anything. They froze, struggling. And she punched him in his smug fucking face. "I'll show him old." Chiyo was cold. "I'm afraid you very thoroughly underestimated what you've put your tiny dick in, boy." Raiga knelt on the ground, blood dripping from his face, aura flickering. It solidified in a steady glow. Chiyo stepped closer. Quietly she spoke. "I'm the honored elder Chiyo of the White Death, the greatest puppet master in the world, boy, and I'm afraid the only funeral you'll be attending is your own, Raiga Kurosaki." Her fist punched forward, faster than she moved before, but she had to abort as she was too close. Left and right Kiba came, aura bright and strong, and she backpedaled, dancing away, out of the reach of those very dangerous weapons. She needed to stop playing with him and end this. He was at least an A-rank threat, and lightning, the kind of lightning he was wielding, was very much an issue for her golem. Well, this puppet at least. Raiga kicked her in the face, and it came out of nowhere. She shrugged it off and retaliated, a fist clipping his shoulder. A blade descended. Chakra flooded her body, raging to her tenketsu, and she substituted with her lifeless puppet, who was immediately bisected in a flurry of breaking steel, intricate machinery, and fuin tags. Chiyo felt every one of her 85 years. A faint green glow surrounded her hand as she healed the deep bruise on her face. A laugh, if nails on a chalkboard could be characterized as such, burst out of Raiga's mouth, and he straightened, shoulders shrugging up and down as he cackled. "I don't know who the hell you are, never heard of you, but an old bitch like you who can take a hit like that deserves first-rate funeral services, don't you agree?" Balls of lightning, yellow and silver, crackling like stormy will-o'-the-wisps, started to fill the air around them in clusters. He used no hand seals. She had no time to summon a second golem. "How the hell?" He pointed one of the blades at her. "Perhaps I'll splurge for the fine mahogany, what do you say?" Point first, the blade spun, then stopped as Raiga plunged both blades in the ground. Hands flicker-quick sped through hand seals, and Chiyo was torn between jumping at him or getting the hell out of the way. Those electric orbs couldn't be good. Instinct warred with her concern over Kazan, who Raiga didn't know was there and was too close to the eventual blast zone, and it clouded her judgment. Chiyo leaped into the epicenter of what promised to be a colossal lightning strike, but the promised grand technique didn't hit her or anything near her. No, it hit Raiga. From a quickly swirling storm above him, bolts shot down and struck him and did nothing except create an enormously strong aura, hard to look at, spiking around him. In disbelief, she watched as he now crackled with unrestrained power. Those same instincts were screaming at her to get away. Get away now! Chakra working in overdrive, she pushed off the ground backwards, cratering the ground. It wasn't enough. Chiyo tried to push herself into a high-speed technique, a shunshin, simply an overcharged reinforcement technique that did its best to mimic teleportation, but really wasn't. Even that wasn't fast enough to get her fully away as he followed her, ready. He'd baited her in, and she'd fallen for it. His left blade took her arm at the elbow as they both exited shunshin. She'd thrown it up in preparation to summon another golem in front of her, but he was quicker than she'd anticipated. The other blade, hook first, swept at her face neck level. Am I really going to die to a stupid prick like this? Ebizo would be so disappointed. Emotion warred. She'd lived a good life. Chiyo was concerned far more about Kazan and Naruto. Bare-chested and skinny, looking like a wet blonde rat, he came literally flying of the slippery eaves of the building next to them, blindsiding Raiga Kurosaki with an overhead strike that, despite his unaware quarry, was easily parried. Distracted, Raiga fully turned and saw who had prevented him from killing his prey. The smile that spread across his face was easily the worst thing Chiyo had seen that day. Insanity warred with greed. Happy, Raiga was happy to find the person he'd been looking for all along. Two other men she very much recognized came barreling up the stairs close to them, near the building whose roof Naruto had flown off of in his noble and stupid saving grace. Chio found herself smiling. Stupid boy. Chio still stood strong, despite her arm. The balance threw her off, but she was already sending healing chakra into it. Thankfully it was cauterized by the intense heat. Naruto, take your friend and leave. This is too much for you. And I'm done hiding. Torin and Sarayu stopped, eyeing Raiga with something much like fear. You two fuckknuckles had one job, kill the kid. You couldn't hack it? Raiga snorted. I figured that you gutter trash were overrated, but now I see that was too generous by far. Sarayu growled, but still does Torin but a hand on his arm. He shook it off and stepped forward, the five of them all making a pentagon-shaped standoff. Says the great Raiga Kurosaki, Thunder of Kirigakure, who can't even fuck off one wrinkled bitch. Both blades dropped to his sides as Raiga turned. I'm killing you both after I'm done with this fantastic funeral. I doubt your employers would mind, and besides, I really don't give a shit. I don't work for anyone here. Chio materialized an ornate scroll in her now only remaining hand. Lucky the blade cauterized the wound. Chio smiled. This was merely an opportunity to try out some experimental puppetry, after this was all over. Without looking at Naruto, she spoke. I mean it, idiot. Grab that sweet boy and leave, flee as far as you can. To Konohagakure, methinks. I assure you they will go to the ends of this very earth to protect you, Naruto. But... go. Naruto realized staying would just distract her. He fetched Kazan from behind the dumpster and left, agonized indecision painted on his face. But he went. Are you stupid fucks going to stand there or go after him? None of you are going anywhere. Chio was calm now. This was too dangerous not to use everything she had. Raiga and Sarayu both snorted, looking at each other then back to her. She sped through hand seals, 10, 20, 30, 40. Raiga merely watched. Confident or arrogant? Both assuredly, but it didn't matter. He wouldn't be able to tell her secret after this if he was dead, right? Chio smiled. Torin wasn't smiling. His eyes had widened. That's the White Death of Suna. You idiots, kill her now. Both Sarayu and Raiga looked amused. This would strain her, 2 puppets per finger, but she'd been training to do just such a thing. A long time it had been since she trained seriously, and the time on the road to Hoziki had been good for her. To her enemy's detriment. White Collection, the Chikamatsu collection of 10 puppets. Huge smoke clouds, 1, 2, then 10 flashed into existence around her. Raiga and Sarayu stopped smiling. Oh yes, they knew who she was now. Torin turned and ran, Raiga and Sarayu staring at him in disbelief, back down the way the two of them had come. Good. She wanted all of them to know. She wouldn't hold back now. /Haven Quarter. /Hoziki City. /Land of Fire. Naruto. Concussive fire, like huge thumping bass drums, beat a staccato rhythm as they moved away from where the sounds were coming from. Lightning, like a glowing trident from the heavens, crashed down behind them with the force of a hurricane, but the thunderous booms of some terrible weapons didn't stop. Screaming started. Naruto and Kazan, huddled together and running low to the ground, ducked behind another nameless, faceless building. Haven Quarter was more a warren or a maze than a city. Granny Chio was doing something huge behind them. She was buying time with her life. Frustration welled up inside him, despite Naruto understanding the situation. The mark was supposed to give me the edge so this wouldn't happen. But the truth was it wasn't enough. Naruto was a child when it came to the shinobi arts. Emotions warred. On one hand, he'd seen the amount of bullshit shinobi peddled, meddling in other countries' affairs, their lack of honor, the underhanded tactics those shinobi who claimed to be willing to aid Iron deserted them in their hour of need. Now Iron was gone. Did he really want to be a part of that? Naruto. Go? Kaz was right. Naruto tapped his shoulder with the back of his knuckles, shucking the thoughts from his head. One thing at a time. Let's go, buddy. Together, the two runaways kept low, slinking across the alleyways, always making for Sunshine Court, the place Chio and Naruto had settled on as the meeting place in case of separation. Sunshine Court was so named for the wide-open plaza space that never seemed to be touched by shadows. A brightly lit happy place where families gathered to take in the sunshine. No one was there now, though. Storefronts dark and only the fitful flickering of lamps lit the space. If he had to guess, it was about 200 feet by 200, an even square dominated by a gigantic fish statue in mid-jump. Huh, Naruto muttered, staring at the garish piece. Why? Naruto and Kez walked to the edge of the fountain and slumped down against the rock balustrade ringing the display behind them. What? Oh, well, I just realized that fish is a sunshine trout. Probably what this place is named after. Kez didn't look the least bit interested. They were silent, listening to the splashing of the fountain and the rain slapping against the overfull pool. There was a silent whine from the lanterns ringing the courtyard, and Naruto tried not to shiver, despite the warmth of the rainy deluge. What would the two of them do when this was all over? It was the first time Naruto had ever considered it. What would they do? Where would they go? Admittedly, his first thought had been to book a ticket on an autobus head down Highway 14 from Hoziki to Konoha. As a kid, he told everyone who would listen, even those who really didn't want to, that he wanted to be a shinobi. That he'd leave when he was of age, which now that he thought of it, he was, 10 years this October. Happy birthday to me. Naruto felt around in his pocket and grasped a picture that Kez had drawn for him. What would they do now? Master Auron had high hopes for him, a respected position as a premier fuinsmith. A life of honor, a life of prestige, a life of creative work that wouldn't change the world, but it would provide a life for those in iron. Fuinjutsu was their way or life, the safeguard against the elements, the very lifeblood of their military might. The thought was bitter, but he couldn't unthink it. Naruto didn't even want to think of what Mifune would say. How could he be a samurai when there was no more samurai? No, that wasn't the path. The Seifuku-sha flashed into his mind, psychotic yellow Sharingan flaring, burning, destroying, killing everyone. Naruto wanted him dead like he wanted oxygen. He needed it. Had to have it. But as he was now, that would be forever out of reach. The power to contend with the greatest samurai in history, the power to stalemate Kage, to overcome and kill the king of Bijou, the nine-tailed fox. Hashirama Senju had done it, 150 years ago, had taken on the greatest Uchiha to walk the earth and the nine-tails both. So was that the play? Konoha? Become a shinobi? Hopefully learn enough to do what he needed. Naruto looked at Kazan, treated so poorly for something out of his control. In this city, run by the daimyo, who in turn was supported by the Hokage, lay corruption like a bot-fly burrowed into thick skin. She had so much power, and yet people struggled to eat, struggled to keep a roof over their heads, struggled. So many were snatched away by opium, by flesh traders like Shin and Ishiro, and to top it all there were missed shinobi in the streets, openly. How could someone so powerful be so blind except by intention? Naruto was torn. His grip on his sword, heavy now, tightened. Scraping disturbed the strange peace of the Sunshine Court. Kazan scrambled to his feet and Naruto followed, slower, hope blooming in his chest. The wide chest of Sarayu the Lightning Dragon, covered in cuts, bruises, and deep slices, turned the corner before Naruto saw all of him. The Odachi, a huge notched blade rough with scratches, had been carving sparks into the ground. That was the sound they'd heard. Naruto had hoped that he'd see the gray hairs of someone he'd come to view as a weird kind of family. The kind you pick. But she was dead. That was the only explanation for why Sarayu was still alive. Naruto was starting to revise that opinion as he realized Sarayu was out of breath and wild-eyed. Clearly, he'd run from something that truly terrified him. Naruto grinned. Shio wasn't dead. Not until he saw her body lifeless still for a day and a week would he believe it. Where is she? Sarayu came to a stop, looking stiff. Awkward. Where is who? Naruto snarled and Sarayu grinned, though it looked like it was a struggle. She's getting her shit pushed in by that Kurosaki fellow. Sarayu was leaning on his blade. Boy, you shouldn't concern yourself with her. That old bat will be fine. I would worry about you and that potato next to you. Sarayu dragged the blade up and licked the blood off the edge, eyes widening and pupils dilating. He began a slow walk towards Naruto. You know, Torin told me Tanaka believed you could surpass me in strength and skill. What a load of shit. But then I got to thinking. The walk became a run. Naruto backed up, holding an arm against Kazan's immense form. You can't surpass anyone if you're dead. Naruto felt his face tighten, and he swept his blade in a circle, clearing it of water, then raised it in a straight on-guard position. Congratulations. You've now got my full attention. What the fuck is wrong with? Sarayu charged, blade dragging and sending up sparks. Naruto shoved Kaz out of the way as the blade came around in a zoning sweep that nearly took off both their heads. A tingling hum spread through his body, emanating from the mark, quickly followed by low-level pain that started escalating immediately. I guess it needs time to relax? But it gave him what he needed. The next strike of the huge blade was almost telegraphed, but Naruto remembered he couldn't contest in brute force, so as the blade came down he altered his own strike to send the odachi wide, caressing the back edge of Sarayu's weapon with his. Naruto turned, slipping aside, and slid past Sarayu, almost delicately striking, tip first, at the man's thigh. A line of blood appeared through a cut in the man's thick pants, the edge of Naruto's blade parting the fibers like butter. Sarayu's angry grunt was music to his ears. The voices of all the people who ever taught him swordplay, Mifune, Yujimba, Taza, even Torin and Tanaka, was humming through him, instinctual now. The next series of exchanges saw a dense thicket of sword cuts press the clearly tired Sarayu, more notches in his blade appearing as Naruto cut at the older man. Like hacking at a tree, he attempted to simply batter the gutter knife down with sheer ferocity. Sarayu swept his blade, knocking the last strike wide, and Naruto had to reset his stance. Naruto came in again, sensing weakness, testing Sarayu's defenses with a high cut, transitioning low, feinting right then backpedaling to continue probing. Sarayu met each strike, the sparks lighting up their small area, but each strike was laborious. The sword was huge after all. The two circled each other. Sarayu looked disbelieving, confused rather than angry. Naruto was trying to hold on to his focus as the pain from the mark was steadily increasing. I need to end this quickly. Attention like a blade, Naruto honed in on his strategy and executed. He threw himself at Sarayu like a wild animal, blade a humming blur as he came at him from all possible directions, straining for every iota of speed. One cut finally broke through the tight defenses, slice opening on Sarayu's shoulder, then another on his chest, across the face of the dragon, then another on his back as they spun together, the rain dancing around them. Spinning again, so quickly he almost became dizzy, he hammered the odachi as it struggled to keep up, middle strike blocked, but Naruto flowed into a side sweep, aborting it at the last second and knocked Sarayu's blade wide as he put all the force he could muster into a forward knee. Sarayu blocked the knee, turning his body sideways to take it on his thigh. Naruto was within grappling distance. His brain was screaming at him. Naruto kept forgetting they were not remotely on the same page with main strength. Mistake. And it was. He felt, more than saw, Sarayu twist desperately and grab Naruto's small frame in a bear hug, his heavily scarred and muscled forearms snaking under Naruto's chin, taking prime position against his throat. Sarayu dropped to the ground, tightened himself like a vice grip. Naruto was on top and quickly losing air. Sarayu meant to kill him. He couldn't take him in blade work, so he used his only remaining advantage. The pain of the mark was echoing the agony in his lungs, burning for air, burning for oxygen that he couldn't take as he choked. Naruto slammed his fist into what he could reach of Sarayu, rocking back and forth as he was on the cobblestone, rocks digging into his back, but unfelt as his very life seeped away and consumed everything he was. The Uzumaki clutched and dug with his long nails, catching and bleeding him, in various places, but nothing would budge the absolute focus that Sarayu had on his death by strangulation. Was this how Leon Gato felt? His vision narrowed and Naruto spent all his remaining energy on attempting to buck as hard as he could, to throw off the death grip even a little bit. Nothing. Sarayu absorbed it like he was a kitten struggling against a lion, which Naruto very much was. Then, miraculously, Sarayu let go as his vision faded to just pinpricks. Naruto watched, disbelieving, coughing and choking and gasping as Kazan floored Sarayu with another punch, his massive ham fist thunking into flesh like a hammer, over and over again. Kazan was screaming, he couldn't tell what it was, but Sarayu was curled up and taking kicks and punishment that would have practically killed Naruto outright. Naruto found it very easy to forget how unbelievably massive his friend was from time to time. It was very clear now. Kazi! Horror welled up in him as he watched Sarayu uncoil and catch the shin that was rocketing towards his face, curled as he was on the ground. Sarayu grinned through bloody teeth as he yanked with main strength. Kazan fell backward with a yelp. This amount of violence from Kazan was more than Naruto ever thought his gentle friend was capable of. There would be no second wind for someone so opposed to violence in every form. Naruto couldn't speak, his throat felt almost crushed, but if he could have, he would have been screaming right along with Sarayu. Utterly drained, mind numbed with the pain from the mark, Naruto drew even more, suckling at the bottomless well of reserves he knew he had. The agony almost whited his mind, but it was no more painful than watching in slow motion as Sarayu staggered to his feet, somehow clutching his sword reversed point down, and having a front row seat to the terror in his friend's eyes. Kagaya's voice spoke in his head, unintelligible but pleased. Something bargain struck. Anything for his friend. Anything. Chakra drained from him in a blazing rush, more than he'd ever felt taken from him before, everything, all at once. It felt like something else was spinning a technique inside his body. A technique of immense power. Rain splashed and Naruto moved faster than he'd ever moved before. The mark burned. Sarayu stared disbelieving as something dense, a power that had an immense presence entered the world from his hand. A small, glowing red, almost crystalline long knife materialized, held in Naruto's hands, as it plunged through the face of his tattooed dragon. Yo you fucking dash, you fucking sh shit. Blood dribbled from the left side of Sarayu's mouth. The odachi clanged to the ground, hands numbed and grasping together around the razor edge of the weapon that spit at him. The smell of burning flesh wafted sickly sweet as Sarayu's hands smoldered where they touched the impossible creation. Like a deflated balloon, chakra drained and he was almost empty, almost dead from the cost. The red thing vanished, shattering like glass. Naruto felt like he was dying too, wallowing in the sheer agony of the mark and the cost of the technique. It seemed fitting, for what he'd almost lost. Somewhere, in the back of his mind, he felt rather than heard Kagaya laughing. His mark shut down, and his mind was his own again, no painful noise. Naruto watched Sarayu collapse to his knees, water streaming from his body in sheets, then onto his face, sending water over them both. Kez was crying behind him from where he'd fallen. Boneless, Naruto groped for the sword on the ground near Sarayu's body. He clutched his sword. Every time it seemed the blade was all he had except... What the hell had that been? Was that something Kagaya did? The plaza was silent again save for the heaving sobs of Kaz. Guilt welled up inside him. If he'd been, what? Faster, stronger, better, all of it, then Kazan wouldn't have had to do the one thing he never ever wanted. Peace was all the boy had ever known, the only choice life had ever given him. Naruto imagined it was one thing that gave him comfort at night, that despite what people saw of him or thought of him, that this choice defined him, made him something more than just a simpleton. Naruto felt like crying. This all felt like a giant failure somehow. Footsteps sounded behind them, 3 sets judging by the echoes. Chio? No. She wouldn't lead anybody to them. But Naruto found all of a sudden that he didn't particularly care who these new people were. He turned to face the archways anyway. Tanaka the lion, still larger than life and dressed head to toe in now drenched leather armor, almost obscured the 2 thin men behind him. His former trainer's eyes took in the whole square, not stopping for a second until they locked with Naruto's eyes. Naruto didn't look away. Tanaka nodded and he blinked. Tanaka smiled at him. The three men stopped a half-dozen feet from the two boys and dead body of the hero of Hoziki Gutter. Naruto. Tanaka started. It seems I was right about you. Master Shin will be pleased. Naruto just stared at his one-time horrifying looming specter of an arena master. What? Just tell me how you did it. I suspected from the beginning that you suffered a malaise that prevented contact with your chakra or general ineptitude with control. Tanaka shook his head. I found rather quickly that wasn't the case. So, you fixed it? Naruto looked at the other two men, one bald, wearing a sash with a. Naruto swallowed. It was the symbol of the daimyo's court. Tanaka cleared his throat. Naruto looked back at Tanaka. Yes. I fixed it. Tanaka gave a pleased sound in the back of his throat and stepped closer, swallowing Naruto's vision. They locked eyes again. He couldn't look away from that fierce gaze. I had a special feeling about you, Naruto. I taught you what I could and always hoped for more time. Regardless, he looked behind him at the two men who started to look impatient. Regardless, I want you to promise me you'll continue this path. Tanaka swallowed Naruto's small hands with his own, squeezing them not ungently. Naruto felt like everything he'd ever known was turned on its head. He felt tears prickling at his eyes. Quietly, Tanaka leaned in. Remember, Shinobi, endure. This was a test, but you have more in front of you. Endure. Do you understand? This is not the end for you. When the time comes, boy, don't seem too eager. You'll understand later. Just nod. Naruto nodded, trembling, confused, and grateful. Tanaka straightened and stepped aside. The man who stepped forward seemed oddly familiar. Naruto? I am Gecko Hate, an interested party, and this is Chiriku, a Lord Guardian of Hoziki City. We are here for you, for your own safety and that of others involved. Naruto attempted to be polite and bowed, but his back spasmed and he had to rest his hands on his knees. Perhaps this wouldn't be so bad, right? A safe place to rest? It is nice to meet you both. Is this the part where you take us somewhere safe? Chiriku stepped forward. Are you aware of what the Lord Guardians do, Naruto? Stones shifted above them, some falling crackling to the ground, and Naruto darted a glance up, realizing there were people moving above them. Naruto swept the plaza with his gaze and was uncomfortable to find more moving from different directions. Not Bakushin, not Gato's thugs, no, these were more men and women dressed uniformly in the garb of the Royal Guard and the sashes of the Lord's Guardian. Kaz continued to sob. Naruto had a bad feeling about this. You deal with chakra-related stuff? Or something like that? Right. Tanaka simply stared impassively. It was Hate who looked confused and worried. He turned to the hawk-faced Lord Guardian. Chiriku? Chiriku held up a hand without looking back at Hate. His face went blank. Naruto watched the byplay and his palms started to sweat. Not that he could really tell with how drenched everything was, including him. Chiriku took another step forward. Do you know the name Leano Gato, Naruto? The people, the royal guards and other guardians, moved in like a net closing on an unaware fish. Hands were drifting to weapons as Naruto's eyes darted from one to another. Lionel? What could they possibly want? Wild thoughts were running through his head, which was spinning with horrible imaginings. They were here to, hold him accountable for killing Gato's asshole son. He had deserved to die. A voice, a face, that place inside. Bright, loud, sensuous, psychotic, she was screaming, a bouncing, echoing voice that careened across the depths of his being, sound in a cathedral. Rage was rising, rapidly replacing the tired itchiness that filled his body. She made him an echo chamber, bouncing, bouncing, bouncing. Amplifying. Rage. White hot. The mark lit again, a fiery knife plunging into his spine, his mind. An explosive tag went off in his mind and he didn't know what the hell he was doing. A part of him knew this would have serious consequences, but he had the blade in his hand, unknowingly. Outside him, there was shouting. Hate was facing Chiriku, hands up, talking slowly, calmly. Tanaka had backed away, against the shadowed eaves of a nearby building watching everything. The royal guard charged. Shouting resolved and mixed with Kazan's sobs. Hadn't Naruto promised he'd keep him safe? That they'd be free? What was a life lived from jail? Dare he let himself be caged again? They wanted to, what? Lock him up? No. Never. She agreed, purring in his head. There was almost no chakra left in him, though. The mark screamed. His limbs moved slowly, non-responsive. Put the weapon down. Last warning. Chiriku seemed not the least bit alarmed, arguing calmly with hate. What last warning? There wasn't a first. But Naruto spun away from them, moving as those through molasses, giving himself space. Maybe there had been. Was this something he wanted to do? Did he have a choice? Endure. Didn't Tanaka say Shinobi endured? This was one other test, and he'd pass if it killed him. Naruto fed himself the last of his chakra, lightning filling his veins in a trickle, and felt the roar in his chest as he charged Chiriku. Hate, though, was between him and his quarry. Lightning, the lightning that was Naruto, struck with 2 slashes in quick succession. Both missed. What had been facing away from him was now in front of him, a gatekeeper. He locked eyes with Gecko Hate. Naruto had imagined him an average-looking man, thin like a blade, but that impression shattered like a genjutsu. The air suddenly felt heavier, dangerous, chakra-filled. A blade materialized in the man's hands and then he lost track of it. Illusion swirling as everything disappeared but Hate. Chiriku simply watched the scene play out. Naruto didn't even see the flat of the blade, drawn and striking faster than he could process, that slammed into his temple and put him out. Kazan continued to cry and the rain continued to fall.